Right now, the world just exhaled. The anchors are smiling, the markets are up, a ceasefire between the United States, Israel, and Iran is being handed to you as a victory. And I need you to stay with me for the next 10 minutes because what you are being told is a ceasefire might actually be the most dangerous moment of this entire conflict, not because the shooting stopped, because of what happens if it starts again. To understand why this pause terrifies the people who are actually reading the intelligence, you have to go back not to last week, not to February, but to the moment this whole chain of events was set in motion, because this did not appear out of nowhere. Nothing this large ever does. 2015, the JPOA, the Iran nuclear deal was the architecture that kept this situation from becoming a war. It was imperfect, it was contested, but it was holding. Then in 2018, the United States walked away from it. And from that moment, the United States and Iran began circling each other the way two fighters do when they both know the bell is about to ring. Talks sputtered, sanctions tightened, tensions climbed. June 2025, the United States and Israel fought what the world now calls the 12-day war. American bombers into Iranian nuclear facilities. A ceasefire on June 24th mediated through Qatar. The world exhaled that time too, told itself the crisis was over. It was not over. January 2026. Iranian security forces turned on their own citizens, the largest protest movement the country had seen since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Tens of thousands killed in the streets. Trump's response came fast, the largest American military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. February 2026, indirect nuclear talks through Oman. The Omani foreign minister said publicly that real progress was being made. Trump called the negotiations, and these were his exact words, something he was not thrilled with. The talks dissolved, and the decision, it turned out, had already been made somewhere else entirely. February 28, 2026, 6:35 in the morning UTC. U.S. Central Command announced airstrikes against Iran, nearly 900 of them compressed into 12 hours. The Americans named their operation Epic Fury. The Israelis named theirs Roaring Lion. B-2 stealth bombers, B-1 Lancers, B-52S, Tomahawk missiles, HIMARS launchers, all of it directed at a country that had been under sanctions for 45 years. 9 minutes after the American strikes began at 6:44 UTC, Israeli jets launched what they described as decapitation strikes. Ali Khamenei, 86 years old, supreme leader of Iran since 1989, was killed at his compound, along with his daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchild, his daughter-in-law. 40 days of national mourning followed. Khamenei was not the only one. The Iranian defense minister, the IRG commander, the defense council secretary, for top intelligence officials. 7 senior Iranian security leaders confirmed dead before the morning was out. And near Bandar Abbas, a girls' school was hit, killing approximately 170 people. The American and Israeli explanation was that the school sat adjacent to a military base and that a misfired air defense missile caused the strike. Iran called it deliberate. The world watched and struggled to agree on which version to believe. By evening, Iranian retaliation was already in the air. Drones and ballistic missiles heading toward Israel, toward American bases in Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the way a drone struck Britain's Akrotiri base in Cyprus. Missiles were intercepted over Turkey. 3 American service members died, the first US casualties of the conflict, and the war had fully, irreversibly begun. What most people watching from comfortable distance missed completely was a body of water called the Strait of Hormuz. 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, and through it flows roughly 20% of the entire world's oil supply every single day. Iran shut it down, and the numbers that followed do not need interpretation. On February 26, 2 days before the war started, the national average for a gallon of regular gas in the United States sat at $2.98. By April 2026, it had cleared $4 per gallon for the first time since August 2022, a nearly 39% spike in roughly 5 weeks, crude oil surging past $100 a barrel. Japan's prime minister warned publicly that a closed strait would drain his country's oil supply within 8 to 9 months, collapsing the Japanese economy with it. India pulls 60% of its oil from that region. China, 40%. This was never a Middle Eastern problem in isolation. It landed in your gas tank, your grocery bill, your heating costs, whether you had ever looked at a map of the Persian Gulf or not. Replacing Khamenei turned out to be the part that should have worried everyone the most. Iran's assembly of experts named Mojtaba Khamenei, 56 years old, the dead leader's son, as the new supreme leader. Trump called him an unacceptable choice almost immediately. What analysts noted was the detail that actually mattered. Mojtaba had spent his career close to the Revolutionary Guard and carried a well-documented reputation for being even more hostile toward the United States than his father had been. His first declaration as supreme leader was to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. This was not a softer Iran emerging from the wreckage of its old leadership. This was a harder one. By early April, the toll of what had happened was beginning to accumulate into numbers that demand attention. Iran had fired more than 5,000 drones, over 2,000 ballistic missiles, and more than 50 cruise missiles. Qatar, one of the world's top natural gas producers, announced it would take years to restore its output after Iranian strikes shredded its energy infrastructure. Gulf Arab nations that had spent decades building reputations as stable, wealthy hubs for global business watched that reputation dissolve in real time. Across Lebanon, more than 1,600 people had already died and over 1 million had been displaced, more than 1/6 of the country's entire population, uprooted. Then came April 7, 2026. Trump posted on Truth Social before his PM Eastern deadline. His exact words, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." Congressional Democrats called it a potential war crime. Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope, stood in St. Peter's Square and called for peace, describing attacks on civilian infrastructure as signs of hatred, division, and destruction. Less than 2 hours before that deadline expired, a ceasefire was announced. Here is the part of this story that most major Western outlets glossed over in a single sentence. Pakistan brokered this deal. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's government operated as the direct go-between for Washington and Tehran in those final hours. Iran's foreign minister publicly thanked Sharif by name. Behind the scenes, China delivered the final nudge that pushed Iran to accept the terms, and the talks that will now determine whether this pause becomes a permanent arrangement or collapses into something worse are scheduled to happen in Islamabad. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to lead the American delegation. Iran has submitted a 10-point peace proposal as its opening position. Pakistan just stepped onto the global diplomatic stage in a way that almost no one outside of the region is adequately processing. Markets responded within minutes of the announcement. Brent crude dropped more than 13%, landing at $94.74. The Dow Jones climbed 1,300 points, its best single session since April 2025. Relief moved through the global economy like a wave, but the ceasefire started cracking before the ink dried. Lebanon became the fault line almost immediately. Within hours of the announcement, Netanyahu's office confirmed that Israel supported the pause on strikes against Iran and then added one sentence that changed everything. The ceasefire did not include Lebanon. Israel launched Operation Eternal Darkness against Hezbollah that same day, its largest strike package since the war began. 254 people killed across Lebanon, 1,165 wounded, 92 of those deaths in Beirut alone. By April 8, at least 182 more people died in central Beirut from Israeli strikes that landed after the ceasefire was supposedly active. Iran responded by threatening to hit Israel directly if the assault on Lebanon did not stop. Iranian media reported that the Strait of Hormuz, reopening the actual foundation of the entire ceasefire agreement, had been paused because of those Lebanese strikes. Shehbaz Sharif, the man who built this deal, publicly condemned the violations and urged every party to respect the ceasefire for 2 weeks as agreed, so that diplomacy could take a lead role. And then Iran's Supreme National Security Council released a statement that I want you to hear slowly. Our hands are on the trigger, and the moment the enemy makes the slightest mistake, it will be met with full force. I have spent months tracking where this conflict was heading, the economic pressure points, the diplomatic fault lines, the moves that most people do not see coming until they are already feeling the consequences. I put all of it into an ebook called The Next Global Shift: How to Stay Ahead of Economic Collapse and the Conflicts Reshaping the World. Link is in the description if you want it. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment, because what I am about to tell you is the part that the Pentagon's own budget request quietly confirms, and it changes how you read everything that happens next. Underneath all of this sits a nuclear question that no ceasefire has resolved and no statement of victory has touched. All of Iran's highly enriched uranium remains inside the country, likely entombed at the enrichment sites American bombers struck during the 12-day war last June. Trump stated publicly that the United States would work with Iran to dig up and remove that uranium. Iran offered no confirmation of that plan. Trump and Netanyahu have demanded complete dismantlement of the Iranian nuclear program. Iran's 10-point peace proposal, the document Tehran submitted as its terms for this ceasefire, rejected that demand outright. What started this entire conflict? The thing every press conference cited as justification for 900 strikes in a single morning. It remains completely unresolved, and then there is the number that tells you more than any press conference ever will. The Pentagon's budget request came in at more than $200 billion in additional war funding. $200 billion, that is not a number a government requests when it believes a 2-week ceasefire is going to produce a permanent agreement. That is a number a government requests when it has already planned for what comes next if the talks in Islamabad fail. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard told the Senate that Iran's conventional military capabilities have largely been destroyed, and then added the part that most headlines buried. The regime appears intact. They destroyed Iran's weapons. They did not destroy Iran's will to use the ones it rebuilds. So here is where we actually stand on April 9, 2026. A ceasefire that is largely holding indirect US-Iran exchanges, but with Israeli strikes continuing in Lebanon, Hormuz compliance still contested, a U.S. delegation flying to Islamabad, and analysts on every side noting that both Iran and the United States have every incentive to use this 2-week pause to restock, reposition, and quietly prepare for the possibility that Saturday's talks collapse. Trump's own words on what happens if they do. The shoot-in starts. Israel is reportedly preparing for what officials there are now calling a forever war scenario, meaning they are not planning for a clean ending. They are planning for an extended conflict with no fixed horizon. Secretary General Guterres urged both sides to respect the ceasefire and expressed hope it would be extended. The United Nations is watching. The world is watching. But watching has not stopped anything yet. 2 weeks, that is the window this ceasefire opened. 2 weeks for two sides that each declared total victory to sit down in Islamabad and negotiate something permanent, with a new Iranian supreme leader more hostile than the last, with Lebanon actively burning despite the agreement, with a strait that is technically open but practically fragile, with a $200 billion Pentagon funding request quietly confirming that someone in Washington has already run the numbers on what comes next. The question was never really whether this ceasefire would hold. The question is what the world looks like when it doesn't. If you want my ebook, the full breakdown of where this is heading economically and geopolitically, link is in the description. Subscribe if you are not already, and tell me in the comments, do you think the Islamabad talks hold? Or is this ceasefire already over in everything but name? I read every comment, and I will see you in the next one.